This video is just going to be a very quick overview on how to approach the essay on religion and peace for the 2-unit students. Now, there are different ways in which they can ask this question. They can either give you a quote at the start as a source and then ask a corresponding question, or they can choose not to give you a quote. Then in the question, they can ask you about one tradition, or they can ask you about two traditions. When they ask you about two traditions, it's probably better for the majority of people, because then it's just really a description on two of the traditions instead of, which can take up a lot of time, instead of trying to exhaust all your resources and finding all the information on one and trying to write a whole essay on just one tradition. So the more able students would probably prefer it on just one tradition. The two traditions are to help people. The other reason the two traditions would help the majority of people is because they're never going to ask you to compare two traditions or discuss two traditions. So they're not going to say Judaism does this whereas Islam does this, so Judaism must be better than Islam. They're never going to say anything like that. So if you ever get two traditions, it's Christianity does this, likewise Judaism or Islam does this, or whichever ones you choose to do. But regardless of the question, this is the approach that I think you should use. The syllabus is set up in 4 distinct dot points. And those 4 dot points, I'm going to suggest to you, you're going to talk about all 4 regardless of the question which you get given. So the first dot point in the syllabus talks about the sacred texts and peace within the sacred texts. It then asks you about the principal teachings. It then asks you about how to attain inner peace, and then how to attain world peace. Now, in another video, I'll show you how to apply this when we get an actual question, but it should make reasonable sense just from listening to it here. So, when they ask you about the question, it might pertain just to sacred texts. How do two religious traditions derive their understanding of peace from their sacred texts? It might be something to do. How does one religious tradition attain inner peace for the community? How does one religious tradition's principal teachings inform their notions of world peace? Okay, so it's going to be something to do with those 4 dot points there. So what I'm suggesting is that regardless of the question, you're going to talk about sacred texts, the principal teachings on peace, inner peace, and world peace, regardless of the question. So if we number it 1, 2, 3, 4, and they ask us about inner peace, so how do two religious traditions help their adherents in achieving inner peace? What we would do is we'd put a big circle around 3. But in order for a tradition to get their understandings of inner peace and therefore be able to help their individuals, we have to first of all figure out where did they get their notions of peace from. So you're going to have to talk about, well, they get them from their sacred texts. You're then going to say, well, the sacred texts then inform their principal teachings on peace. Their principal teachings on peace combined with their sacred text then help an individual attain inner peace, whether it's through worldly means or transcendental means that has just been given to them. Then they will show their inner peace through their actions in world peace. So regardless of the question, you're going to be talking about all 3 steps. So the sacred text in, let's use Christianity for the example. We talk about the New Testament. So don't talk about the Old Testament or the Hebrew Scriptures, you're talking about the New Testament. There you want to be talking about the Gospels, letters, Acts, letters, and Revelation. You then might be able to get, let's say, 3 quotes that you'll be able to use. Then when it comes to principal teachings, Jesus' commandment of love, then the just war theory, and Pax Christi. Then for inner peace, we can talk about the transcendental. My peace I leave you, my peace I give you, I do not give to you as the world gives. So there's the transcendental, and people just achieve that because they're loved by God, or the worldly means, and that could be through, in Christianity, doing the specific rituals that are defined by the church, or it could be through prayer, meditation, blah, blah, blah. Then in worldly peace, I suggest you have examples of world peace for both the traditions within the tradition. So if in Christianity, you'd be looking at some ecumenical movement. And then without of the tradition, where you'd be looking at some interfaith. So the Council of Jews, Muslim and Christian relations would be enough for that. So regardless of the question, you're going to be talking about 1, 2, 3, and 4. That way, you know you've covered all bases, and you've probably done really well in answering the question, because you know you've done everything. Now, what I would suggest that you do after you've done it for the 1, 2, 3, 4 for Christianity, then get your other tradition. Let's say it's Islam, and you'd be talking about the Quran, Sunnah, Hadiths, principal teachings of Jihad, whether it's the greater or lesser. Then inner peace and how that is obtained. You'd be looking at the transcendental again. You'd be looking at worldly means through the pillars. And then world peace the same. You'd need to find within and without of the tradition examples there. Again, say the question asks you something about how does the principal teachings of peace guide adherents in relation to obtaining world peace, then you'd look at the jihad there, focusing on there. It's got 2 focuses here, so we're looking at the big links between those two, but you're never going to get your understanding of your principal teachings unless you talk about where they're rooted in the sacred text and the life of Muhammad. And if we have inner peace, that's going to help us to attain world peace. It's not essential, but it's going to help us to attain it. So regardless of the question, you're going to be talking about 1, 2, 3, and 4. And if they ask you about 2 traditions, then you'll easily be able to remember the links that we've made there.